Hello and welcome to the 2015 State of Black America web series. I'm your moderator, Shannon Lanier. Now every year the National Urban League releases its highly anticipated report on the state of Black America. The report has become the national touchstone for the social and economic status of African American and Hispanic communities. This year's report, Save Our Cities, Education, Jobs, and Justice, addresses the crisis facing African Americans and other communities of color in education, employment, and justice. Each year, we ask the same question: what is the state of Black America? Today, our esteemed panelists will answer that question as it relates to education. Now, despite the growing reform movement and restructuring of education standards, a good education, positive outcomes, and graduating with the skills needed for college, work, and life is not guaranteed. How do we put our children first? What is the state of Black education? Joining me for that discussion is David Johns, Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans, and David Banks, President and CEO for the Eagle Academy Foundation. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
So first of all, why aren't our children being put first? What's the problem, Mr. Banks?
I think that really across this country, we still have not made education the #1 priority. I don't think that in far too many of our communities, our elected officials, our leaders have not prioritized education. We have not seen this investment in our young people as something that we see as ultimately something that represents the actual survival of our nation. I think what we've found ourselves is in a place where there's this kind of political argument which takes place, which says, well, we've been investing billions of dollars and we've not seen a real return on investment. Are you saying that we need to continue to put more money into what a lot of people see as a black hole? And actually, it's not really. We need to continue to invest more in education, but the bigger issue is about the political will that we need to make sure that the communities and our parents and everybody else is involved.
David Johns.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Brother Banks said, but I'm often reminded that we sometimes overcomplicate things, right? I think the reality is that the world I live in, children are always first, and anybody I know and I enroll in my world have to put children first as well. So for me, it's simply remembering, and David Banks is a wonderful example of this, and Eagle Academy lives this every single day. Every caring and concerned adult has an opportunity every single day to ensure that there's not a single child who questions his or her worth, whether or not somebody values them, will be there to support them, and stand with them when they make the mistakes that we all invariably make, right? And so we sometimes get into debates about whose role is what and who's responsible for what, whether that's catching up or accelerating. But the reality is that we can all show up. Not everybody can teach, right? Sometimes people say silly things like teaching isn't rocket science, and they're right, it's a lot harder. But everyone can show up and correct for the fact that sometimes our babies go through things that would break the average adult, right? I'm talking about prolonged exposure to trauma or stress. These things have real implications in the lives of students. But we can all find some meaningful way to show up every single day to fix this problem.
Okay, so what are some suggestions you all have worked with which work in your community on finding that suggestion for everyone, for parents, for communities, for churches, everyone to get involved? What are some suggestions?
You know, first of all, I think right here in Washington, D.C., so you see under the leadership of Kaya Henderson and the work that she's doing, I think she's almost the perfect example of the kind of leadership and visionary leadership that you need to have in order to transform, school districts across this nation. Part of the work has to be about how we're doing skill development and making sure that young people have the skills necessary to pass this kind of state exams and develop the skills that they're going to need to be successful.
Okay, so that's a good point, but that's also a problem that I have with schools because it seems like so many schools are teaching to pass those state exams instead of teaching the skills necessary for those kids to advance to the next grade.
Right, well, exactly. So that's what I'm trying to say. That's why I said that should represent part of what we do, but a real comprehensive education really takes into account a whole lot more than that, right? And so how do you engage the community? How do you engage the business community? If it's in the interest of the business community to have a workforce that is prepared to come and work at these companies, what we do a terrible job with is exposing young people to jobs and internships and career opportunities while they're in school. So very often we talk to young people about going to college and being able to be prepared and have a great career, and many of them have never stepped foot inside of a law firm. They've never stepped foot inside of a firm that specializes in technology or Google or whatever it is. We got to do a much better job of helping to activate possibilities for young people. See, ultimately, you have to help young people to have the light go on inside of them. And in order to do that, that takes exposure. You can't tell somebody you want them to go to college and they've never visited a college campus. So it's about how do you connect the community and ultimately how you engage those parents, because parents have to be real partners in making sure that those things happen as well.
And parents with a capital P, right? So we're acknowledging, we're talking about black kids. Often it's not a blood relationship, but it's an aunt or an uncle or a caring adult who simply shows up, right? But Brother Banks talked about the light that needs to go on, and for me, it's actually, the light is already there, right? As Brother Asa Hilliard said, I've never met a child, especially a black child, who is not a genius. And there's no secret to how you support them. The first thing you do is to meet them with love, and the second thing you do is to support them as they grow. So for me, in the work of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans, it starts with high quality early learning. There are simply too many babies who do not have access to high quality early opportunities to learn and develop, right, socially and emotionally, to your point about this not being simply about cognitive growth, which is also important. And so we have to ensure that every child we know, and unapologetically, every black child we know is enrolled in a high quality early learning program. That's one. The second thing we can do is go where we started, put children first. We have a partnership, the initiative has a partnership with Ebony Magazine that has allowed us to produce summits. We call them AFAMED summits. And they are literally opportunities for young people to speak full truth to power and to make recommendations to the community writ large. Their teachers, their leaders, their clergy members, everyone who should have a role in this, because it takes a village. They get to make recommendations that say, this is what we need in order to feel safe, engaged, and supported. And the thing that most kids have said across the country, Brother Banks joined us when we launched this in Atlanta at Morehouse College last year, is that they want love. They want somebody who is going to show care and concern for them, and want somebody to ask them where they're going and why they're doing it.
And I understand all that, and I get that they need that support because a lot of them don't have that. But once they do have that support, how are they able to compete with the other school systems that are out there that have a lot more resources, a lot more money, when some of the inner city schools in the urban areas aren't even able to afford books or computers?
So let's be clear that resources are important, right? I want to acknowledge that. But let's also be clear that in spite of not having access to material resources, we are a community of people who have always shown up and shown out, right? So the First Lady has been really thoughtful about this, and through her Reach Higher initiative, she's highlighted the fact that in communities where we expect, and not we, but popular prevailing notion would expect that our kids are not capable of achieving, in every district where they have a school, for example, where Eagle Academy exists, kids are doing phenomenal things, right? And often we have to be really clear about using the exact data, right? So the point I want to make here is this. People often say silly things like, there are more black men in prison than in college, which is factually inaccurate. It's a lie. We question whether or not the fact has ever been real. But the reality is that people say it like the sky is blue, right? And it has real life implications, right? When I taught kindergarten, what that meant was that a person who believed that black boys are going to go to prison or end up dead would not go the extra mile to understand who that child is and how to engage him or her, what books they read, what music excites them, what are the things you need to say in order to frame a lesson, right? But when we correct for that, when we acknowledge that that data is not true, and this Department of Education released a bunch of data for the first time ever in the history of our country that made this point very clear, we can then start to change the practices. But we also acknowledge that if a kid can go through moving through gang territories to get to school, are not being hungry, being homeless, all of the things that come with living in communities that have these challenges, going to school and filling out an application, a FAFSA is the easiest thing to do, right? Our kids are resilient, they show up in spite of, and we need to do a better job of tearing down the barriers that they end up climbing over on their way to success.
But what about when we're talking specifically about those Common Core state standard tests? And now there's this new rule that all those kids have to be educated at the same level throughout the school system in order to pass those tests. But is that possible, and is that realistic, David?
Listen, you know, I've always said we have to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? So if we've got to pass these state exams, we've got to make sure we're focused and we can pass the state exams. What I'm talking about is a much greater degree of a comprehensive experience of what school is all about. The way school was in many ways when I went to school, where we actually valued art and music and developing the whole child. You know, David is absolutely right when he talks about the fact of, you know, it takes that village, right? And we've got great examples. Schools like the Eagle Academy, we're doing great work. There are tremendous islands of success all around this nation. The problem, as I see it, is that there's a lack of really connecting all of the dots. You've got schools operate primarily as an island unto themselves. And what we've not had is enough, I think, leadership that connects all of the schools so that whatever, if you're doing something great, that should not just be for you to do a great job, and we salute you and the great job that you're doing. We're doing a great job in working with young men and helping to figure out what activates young men, what gets young men excited about being in school and participating in their own success. But the system itself does not do nearly a good job of saying, what is the Eagle Academy learning how to work with young men? How do we spread that to schools all across the country? So the issue is that we know what to do, but we've not activated best practices to connect so that everybody's learning all of those things as well.
This is why the president thought it important to do two things relevant to this work. And one is establish the Promised Neighborhoods program, right? Which is about ensuring that there are communities where you can celebrate practice. The second thing is launch the My Brother's Keeper initiative, right? He leveraged the platform of the White House to call out the fact that on most quality of life ladders, the indicators, boys and men of color are at the lowest rungs. Now, to be clear, while we need to be my brother's keeper and our sister's supporter, there are children who would not feel comfortable checking either of those boxes, nor should they. But we have to acknowledge there's power and precision, and we need to be targeted in how we respond to some of the challenges that our students face. But My Brother's Keeper not only said, here's a problem that most people are no longer even moved by, that there are so many black boys who aren't reading on grade level at 3rd grade, or so many who get pushed out of school. The same things are happening to black and brown girls, let's be clear. But celebrated the opportunity to highlight organizations like Eagle Academy, like Chabot College Driving Black Brothers, or the Coalition for Schools Educating Boys of Color, programs that have been in communities for decades doing this work. But the other part of it was also being able to bring people together, to share best practices, to be able to highlight opportunities to leverage resources to enhance the work.
Yeah. And I want you also to tell us a little bit more about the Eagle Academy, because I've worked with you all before and you do amazing work. But tell us more about your program and about your mentorship as well.
Well, the Eagle Academy, we created a little over a decade ago in New York City as the first all-boys public high school in New York City in more than 30 years when we opened. And we did it really because of the crisis that was, excuse me, impacting young men of color in New York City. At that time, the graduation rate for black boys was only 32%. And we also recognized that 75% of the inmates for the entire state of New York came from 7 neighborhoods in New York City. So these are just overwhelming kinds of statistics that people were analyzing data, they were having conferences and panel discussions, writing some books, and we need all those things. But at the end of the day, it seemed like the most you could hope for was a good after-school program for 15 or 20 boys. You'll never catch up that way. Yeah. And so with that, we decided that we would create this school specifically for young men of color, a school that would really be very focused on developing them as leaders, making sure that they understood that they also had to give back by way of community service. So we have mentors, we have an after-school program, we bring the young men to school on Saturdays, all the kinds of things that all the research says are components of a successful school, not just a successful school for boys. Although I will say this notion of having mentors for young men is critically important. Lots of schools don't recognize that. I think every one of us knows that having a mentor is a good thing if you can have it, right? But when you recognize that in 1920, 90% of our children had a father at home, and today the number is just a little over 30%. That's a significant challenge in this hip-hop era, this hip-hop generation, with so many dads who are not there. And so young men need male role models, father figures, to help them in their journey to manhood. And that's one of the reasons why the mentoring is so important.
And I think that's important for your program as well as your parent involvement and the community involvement. What do you both think, for those that unfortunately don't have Eagle Academy in their communities, hopefully every school will soon, every community will, what do you all think that the community and parents could do more of, and even teachers, in order to help our students be successful?
So let's start by honoring that parents show up in the best way possible. And so while sometimes people celebrate the exceptional examples of parents who don't care or who don't know enough to be engaged, I want to honor the parents who show up and do what they can do.
That's right.
Period. Acknowledging that every caring and concerned adult can ensure that they are connected to the school and their community. You can show up informally and ask how you can be of service. You can also think about formal ways to be connected. So when I was teaching kindergarten and 3rd grade on 110th Street and Broadway, we invited members of our community in to read with our students, to talk to them about their family, culture, and history. It was ways to connect many of the lessons that were going on in the classroom. They also were able to serve as sources of support for students who simply needed somebody to talk to. So I think that that's a wonderful way that everybody can think about getting engaged.
And I'll give you just a practical example for parents who are paying attention to this. One thing that we've done at Eagle Academy that has completely transformed how we engage our parents, we only have parent gatherings and meetings on Saturday mornings. It's something very simple. A Wednesday night, 7 o'clock meeting at the school is good for school personnel. It's not so great for parents who've got other kids, they're coming home from work, they're tired, they're stressed out. Do it on a Saturday morning and you'll see the difference. That's just one simple thing that we have done, and we get standing room only because parents appreciate the fact that we're meeting them halfway, and that makes all the difference in the world.
One more thing we can do is listen authentically to young people, generally, right? So I talked about our summits, and one of the things that I'm most proud of is that it's a literal platform for young people to talk and be heard. Right. And far too often, my experience is that adults can sometimes listen to respond. So real quick example, we hosted an event in Las Vegas where it was literally designed for young people, first high school students, then college students, to make recommendations to the elected officials, school board members in the community. And with all of the eloquence that all of the brilliant black babies I've ever met mustered, this young woman stands up there and says two things. One, why is it that you only seem to care about us when we are either exceptional or we're falling way behind? She then cautioned everybody and said, let's be clear, when you come and visit our schools, it's not what we experience on a daily basis, it's what the adults in the building want you to experience. But we need help, we need you to see us, and we need you to see all of us. And there are students who are clapping, there are educators and mentors who are clapping. And without almost seeming to pause and take a breath, there was a member of the school board who ended up saying to her, baby, you haven't had it bad because I marched with King. And you could watch the emotion drain from her face. And so I had to remind her and everybody else in the room, one, nobody wins when we play oppression Olympics. Two, it's never fair to invalidate the perspective or experience of young people. They go through things every day that some adults simply can't fathom. So we sometimes pause when things like Michael Brown happen. But some people forget that for some of those kids in St. Louis, that was a fifth or sixth friend they've lost this school year. And so I say the word listen and think that it's simple, but I know for so many adults, the practice of actually sitting and listening authentically is something that we need to practice more often.
Very good advice. Thank you both. And before we go, we have to tell us about your shirt. We've been looking at it here. What does your shirt say?
Yes, I love this. So you can go to our website, www.fmeducation.com, and learn more about this. So this shirt essentially says, because of them we can, and lists some of the watershed figures from throughout our history. So one of my favorite things to do, there's a backpack that I carry with me. This notebook has it as well. Any chance I get, I ask adults and kids if you can name the people on the shirt. And the sad reality is that I can count on one hand the number of times in the last year where someone has been able to name everyone on this shirt.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
And the frustration for me is that these are the most celebrated figures, right? Mamie Till, Frederick Douglass, Betty Shabazz. And if our community doesn't know these figures, we definitely aren't celebrating the leaders who are doing exceptional work now, and our babies have to know who they are and whose they are in order to be successful.
But here's the bigger part of the indictment, which is that not only do the young people not know, he could use that same thing with the teachers and parents, right?
I do. That's
and
my
they don't know as
frustration.
well. So what are we transferring? What are we teaching and passing on? If our young people don't understand the struggle that people fought, bled, died, and sacrificed for them, all of that is, we've got to all be educated as a community.
And you want to see a baby light up? Tell him or her about how connected he or she is to the brilliance that comes from our community, right? It's such a source of pride, and it's essential for having the resilience that's required in order to be persistent and successful.
Well, I'm sure both of you will be on a shirt soon as well. Thank you for all your hard work and that great advice.
Thank you, sir.
All right, now please share this web series with your social media friends and followers, and let's continue this solution session using the hashtag #SaveOurCities. Now, please get involved. The State of Black America web series has been presented by AT&T. Thank you, AT&T, for your continued support of the National Urban League. We also thank Comcast for their production support of the State of Black America web series. Together, we are empowering communities and changing lives. Now, don't forget to also follow me on social media at Mr. Shannon Lanier and at Arise TV 360. And for more information on the State of Black America and to purchase the book, visit the National Urban League at www.stateofblackamerica.org.